In my old age, I've seen a lot of things. Some things I'm a little more proud of than others. As a boy, there wasn't much of a damn thing that could sate my appetite for the world around me. Everything in reach I had to get my hands on, take it apart, study it. My natural curiosity is what got me into the many scraps and situations of my youth. I remember when I wasn't any older than 6. It was the fall of 1928. Me and several of the local boys were playing a game of hide-and-seek, and Denny Lewis was a seeker, and a damn good one at that, so I took it upon myself to find a damn good hiding place. I remembered the hayloft outside of our barn, and figured I could hide myself among the many bales of hay up there. Maybe even push some of those bales around like I had times before when I wanted to build a fort. Get myself a perfect hiding place. Denny started counting out loud from 100, and I took off, running to the barn, the breeze tickling my cheeks and smelling like the harvest. I ran through those big red doors, and my eyes fell on Denny Lewis's mama, lying on the ground, straw in her hair, and her dress hiked up, with my daddy lying on top of her, looking like he was trying to pick himself up, but seemed to be having trouble. I had no idea what I was seeing, but I would later learn all about what my daddy was doing. And when I was 14, when me and Sandra Higgins made our way up into the same hayloft that I had hid so many times and made so many forts in to get out of the rain, she shook the water from that beautiful, blazing red hair of hers and noticed my eyes stuck on her nipples poking out like little buttons in the cold, wet air. She hiked up that flowery yellow dress that she liked to wear and spread her creamy white legs. There, in the smell of spring rain and old horse shit, I made love for the first time. Beautiful girl she was. "Daddy!" My little young voice rang out, echoing over the dusty wooden walls. My old man turned and stared at me, like he'd been caught dipping his hand into the honey pot, and for lack of better words, that's exactly what he was doing. He hoisted himself off Miss Lewis and made his way over to me. "What are you doing in here, son?" He spoke calmly, slowly. "We were playing hide-and-seek, Daddy. I was gonna hide up in the loft." "Yeah? Well, you ain't gonna tell nobody what you saw here, right, boy?" I could hear the anger rising up in his voice, but I kept on pushing it, like the curious little boy that I was. "Well, what exactly were you doing, Daddy?" He just stared at me, his eyes slowly growing darker in the brightness of the fall day. Mrs. Lewis, still a ways behind me, was up on her feet, straightening her dress and picking bits of straw from her long golden hair. I was too busy looking at Mrs. Lewis to notice that my daddy meandered his way over to the wall where he kept the tools and picked out a hefty, dirt-crusted shovel. "You ain't gonna be telling nobody, right, boy?" he repeated in that slow, calm way he always spoke when he was angry. But me being the stupid child that I was, I just kept right on prying. "Daddy, what was—" I didn't have a chance in the world to ask before the side of my right cheek exploded with pain as I fell to the ground in a pathetic bundle. My vision went white hot. All noise became muffled, as if the world suddenly got sucked into a vacuum. What I could hear seemed distant, ghostly even. I could hear Mrs. Lewis screaming her pretty little head off, and strangely, the long, low whistle of a train in the distance. Whether it was my imagination or not, I don't know. But I've learned in life that there's no coincidences. I heard that whistle as clear as I could hear Mrs. Lewis's screaming, Sandra Higgins's soft, whispering moans as thunder rolled across the gray sky, and my father's harsh, labored breathing as he stood over me, brandishing his shovel, as if it were Excalibur. I heard that train. Lord help me, I heard it. You ain't gonna be telling nobody. You hear? Daddy! Another explosion erupted as my father brought the shovel down onto my exposed chest. I heard several pops and cracks echoing throughout my body. I held up my small arms in defense, but they were crumpled like paper at the force of his blow. I dared to rise my hand up for protection again, only to see my fingers crooked and bloody. Mrs. Lewis was no longer screaming, but babbling, like she'd seen a ghost, and my father turned to her and waved his weapon. "Shut up, bitch! Shut the fuck up!" he yelled, his voice like that of an angry god. While he was distracted, I tried to crawl away, my crushed fingers clawing at the straw and earth, pulling myself to freedom. It was all for naught, though, as my father grabbed me by the leg and threw me towards the ladder into the loft. "He's just a boy, Clay! Just a boy!" Mrs. Lewis kept muttering. "He didn't do nothing wrong. He didn't do nothing wrong." "I said shut up!" he spoke again with a godlike force. He swung the shovel down on me again. I heard a very loud crack, almost like lightning skimming across the sky. Very faintly, I heard the train's whistle again, that loud, shrill pitch in the distance. He flipped me over onto my back and spoke again. "Are you gonna be telling anyone about this, boy?" His voice had calmed down, but there was a deep anger there, calm and intense. I felt one of my teeth fall into the back of my throat. A small fountain of vomit and blood gushed from my mouth. As I tried to cough it up, I feebly turned my head to spit it out. No, Daddy. I ain't telling nobody." "Good." My father tossed the shovel aside, scooping me up in his arms and carrying me like I was just a baby. His voice had flipped to that genuine concern, like any good father's voice. "You okay, boy? You took a mighty big fall off the ladder. Right, Janice?" He turned to Miss Lewis, still holding me in his arms. Her face burning from tears, she only nodded rapidly. Yes. Are you okay, Daniel? Are you okay, sweetie?" She rushed over and ran her shaking hands across my tiny battered face. My father pushed me into her arms. "Take him up to the house and into bed. Tell Martha what happened, okay? I'll go down to the town to see a doctor. Quickly now." Mrs. Lewis pulled me even closer and ran to the house to put me to get my mother and put me down and be comfortable till the doctor came. Before I blacked out, I remember Mrs. Lewis running across the field to my house, the smell of the harvest filling my nostrils. Mrs. Lewis quietly muttering how sorry she was, and in the distance my eye caught the slowly moving shape of a black train. Smoke pluming from the engine, the slow chug, chug, chug of the wheels, and the horrible shriek of the whistle, calling me to darkness. The doctor came and went, but I had no idea. I was unconscious the entire time. A broke hip, 3 broke ribs, 1 dislocated, a cracked skull, 2 missing teeth, 4 broken fingers, 1 broken wrist, and a mile of bruises. Other bits of damage appeared over time. I lost hearing and most of the sight out of the right side of my face. On a good day, and I can say I had plenty of them, I had a slight limp. But on a bad day, I was practically crippled. My left hand froze up sometimes. I couldn't move my fingers worth a damn, but I got along fine with my condition. My father was never found out. And the fact that Mrs. Lewis never came back around the house only meant that she would never speak about it. We all just sort of went on with life. I lived as best I could for 10 years, before I heard the whistle again, and now it wasn't uncommon to see or even hear a train near the farm. Hell, there was a track not more than a mile from my front door, but this train was different. The whistle didn't sound right. It sounded like a dying rabbit, nails against a chalkboard, steam spewing out of a kettle, all rolled into one. It's like that sound piercing through you. That sound pierces through you and sends shivers down your bones. Not a pleasant feeling, in other words. I was 16 and living like my fathers before me, working my hands to leather in the earth. I had spent time at what my life would later refer to as hick school, but I soon left after my teachers figured that I was unteachable. I wasn't unteachable. I would just have rather spent my time reading, or taking something apart, or going somewhere I've never been. The world was my playground, and I wanted to play. The thought of leaving my mother alone with my father scared me, though. I owed it to her to stay around and try to protect her. What my father did to me was only the tip of the iceberg compared to all the things he did to my mother. I remember laying up at night, hearing them fighting. My father's booming voice broken up by the reality cracking sounds of broken glass, or the cool, clean sound of flesh on flesh contact. My mother would be in the kitchen the next day, with a few new bruises, maybe a cut or two, but she never complained. It was plain for everyone to see, but they never paid it any mind. That's just how things were. I remember it was a pleasant enough summer night, a little humid, but that's just nitpicking. I spent the night out on the porch, watching the stars and listening to the creatures of the night as they went about their business. And occasionally I found myself glancing out into the barn. It stood there like a mausoleum on the pale moonlight, an effigy to many things: pain, lost love, hard work, and my family, who died on this land before me. My mind wandered to memories of Sandra Higgins. God rest her soul. Memories of the shovel bearing down on me, like a motive bears down on those endless steel tracks. My mind liked to wander, whether or not I wanted to take the ride. Always has. Always will. I remember my father driving his truck, and the bastard was swerving horribly. Obviously, he had indulged in his heart's content to Jimmy McGruder's personal moonshine. "What burns blues makes your blues go away, boy," he would always say. I knew he'd be in a fighting mood, and instinctively made me go to my room. Before I could even reach the stairs, I heard his voice dripping with that damn white lightning. "Martha! Martha, you come here and you welcome me home like a good wife should," he shouted in a slurred fashion. The ceramic jug in his hands spilled the foul liquid onto the floor. My mother promptly came up the cellar without any word and greeted him to his liking, a kiss on the lips and the removing of his coat. As she turned to put his coat on the hook, he reached out and began to grope her. My mother, I'll admit, is an attractive woman, but years of beatings and had slowly taken the brightness from her eyes, the skip from her step, and the song from her lips. We made quick eye contact, but just a brief moment said it all. "Go to bed, sweetie. Maybe it won't be so bad tonight. Just go to bed." But like most nights, it was the same. Her giving in to this predator and his sexual advances just to keep him happy. She suffered through it in silence. God, the things that she did to provide for me. I pray every day that she's still smiling down on me while he's rotting in hell. And my mind quickly wandered back to Sandra Higgins. Did she suffer in silence? Did she let him take her every night? Or did she kick and scream and bite until she was too tired to go on? I don't know. I can't say. God rest her soul, I pray she fought back. I climbed the stairs to my room, trying to block out the labored breathing of my drunken father and the cold, complacent whimpers of my mother. Lying in my bed, I tried to nod off and sleep, just so it can all happen again tomorrow. Soon sleep found me, and I dreamed. A dream that haunted me for years, always picking up new details along the way. My father standing above me with his shovel, staring at me with all the fury of God, his eyes black as black can be, the shovel coming down. I closed my eyes in fear, only to open them and see Sandra Higgins before me. Her beautiful, smooth skin, now wormy and rotted, her hair still crimson as fresh blood, and deep black lines ran along her neck, too horrid to look at, but I can't look away. She hikes up her tattered yellow dress and reveals the further decay of what was once a wonderful sight. She speaks to me, her voice as crisp and as clear as it was that day. "You love me, don't you, Daniel?" All the while, the slow, methodic chug, chug, chug of a train. Sandra opens her mouth, her cheeks tearing wide open into a disgusting, skeletal smile. To speak once more, only her voice isn't there, only a sound that pierces right through you, chilling you to the bone, scratching at your soul. A whistle. I woke up, sweating bullets and soaking my shirt and underwear, but it wasn't the dream that woke me, as horrible as it was. No, it was the rumbling of my stomach for release. I didn't need to be told twice. I swiftly jumped out of the bed, slipped on a pair of trousers, and descended the stairs quite quickly, nearly tripping on the last step in the dark. I could see my father asleep in his armchair in the family room, his jug tipped over, empty and bone dry. The moonlight shone through the window, and I could see a line of drool falling from the corner of his mouth, his head tilted back in a way that he always slept when he was in his chair. I quickly shoved on my shoes, rushed through the front door, and off to the tiny little shed far to the house. The grass swished underneath my feet, and the wind cooled the sweat on my body. I reached the outhouse, flung the door open, squatted down onto the splintery seat without a second thought. There was always stories of porcupines getting their way into the outhouses and gnawing on the seats for the salt from the sweat and such. But I can say I never did see a porcupine. A raccoon did get in once, poor thing. Fell into the hole and drowned in the shit and piss of a small farming family. Kinda sad, really. That was years ago, and that hole had been long buried. I let myself relax, let my body do what it was trained to do in this kind of situation. I nearly nodded off in the smelly little shack, but something jolted me off my seat. A whistle. Low and hot at first, but it grew like into a cacophony, like hundreds of screaming voices. I quickly cleaned myself up and hurried outside. There it was, in the moonlight, not too less than a mile from where I stood, just sitting there on the tracks, which wouldn't have been too uncommon, except there was no switching station out there, just open land, those endless steel tracks. Like I said, I was a curious boy, and obviously something that had been haunting me for 10 years was well worth a look. I broke into a run, the excitement and fear gripping in my heart. I wanted to turn back to the house, to tell myself that I was dreaming, but I kept moving. Thank God for the moon that night. I could see for miles as I got closer to the damn thing, the darker that it got. The smoke from the engine creeped up into the sky and blotted out the light. The bright diamonds in the satire cloth began to disappear, too. I stopped, only briefly, panting and sweating. I looked up, only to find myself right there, next to it. It was unlike any train I'd ever seen. It was black. It hurt my eyes to look directly into it for so long. It was also very noticeably darker right next to the massive machine, like it was devouring the light that got near it. Most trains that came through were freight trains, carrying coal and such to parts unknown, but this was a passenger train. the interior of the cabs brightly lit, revealing its deep and red color scheme. The people. God, the people in the windows, each one of them just sat there, emotionless, unmoving, like statues of some lost civilization. I tried working my way to the front of the thing, each car the same, filled sparsely with unknown, unmoving faces. One or two passengers did turn to look out their windows at me, only to return to the original position, their eyes gray and sad. I kept on walking my way to the engine, till it caught my eye. In one of the windows, it was my father. I wasn't sure at first, but it had to be. It was my daddy. "Daddy?" I yelled out. But he didn't turn to look. "Daddy! Hey, Daddy!" I saw that the entrance to the car was wide open. The light spilled out onto the land. I had to get into that car. Why was he in there? I thought to myself. What the hell is he doing? I hoisted myself up onto the metal steps of the car, only to be knocked out onto my back by a black mass that swelled of the oil and smoke. I looked up to see a man standing there, soot-stained overalls, greasy, white hair jutting out from underneath his conductor's cap. He stared at me intently, before a smile cracked his lips. "You ain't getting on, boy." His voice was flighty and uneven, high-pitched yet low and grumbly at the same time. "Ain't got no ticket." His laugh was unnerving, like the sound of crunching bugs under your boot. "Why you want to get on anyway? Why you want to get on anyway for, boy?" He smiled, still beaming at me. A strange skeletal smile, white and menacing. I found myself reverting back to that scared little boy in the barn 10 years ago. My daddy's on there. I gotta talk to him." He just bellowed that laugh of his. "Boy, lots of people's daddies on this train. No ticket, no ride." He clapped his gloved hands together. Black dust pilfed out. Please, no ticket, boy. No ride." His voice became angry. That's when I truly saw him. His skin pale and free of any sort of blemish, and his eyes, they were on fire, glowing orange like the coals that moved his train. Those fiery coal eyes burned right through me. "Get out of here, boy! Don't come back here! Till you get yourself a ticket." His teeth, they were jagged and pointed like a dog's teeth. I ain't afraid to say, I was scared. In fact, I pissed myself right then and there. But he just laughed, that crunchy laugh of his. "Diamonds, pearl, opal, jade." He turned and slammed shut the doors behind him. Soon the piston started to chug, chug, chug. Smoke billowing out of the engine. It smelled like rotted eggs and bloated summer roadkill. I still laid there in my own filth, watching the black train slowly pull away. The conductor stuck his head out of the engine booth and yelled back to me over the locomotive, "Maybe next time! Hey, Danny boy?" His eyes burning bright as ever. He laid on the whistle. Close up, I could truly hear the sound. It was screaming, melting steel and burning souls, screaming into the night. I only watched as the train pulled away, the screaming black behemoth, riding the endless steel tracks. I walked home, shaken, scared, questioning whether or not I'm truly dreaming, or if this is all a nightmare. The moon was back out and shining in all its glory. The stars sparkled in the dark folds of the night sky. Finally reaching home, I numbly pushed the front door open. It groaned in protest, but I paid it no mind. I trudged into the family room, figuring that my father would be gone, but there he was, still sitting there. I quickly crossed over to him, my hands shaking as I touched his face. It was cold. I saw that it wasn't drool that was dribbling out of his lips. It was vomit. My father was dead to the world, drowned in his own sick. I saw the devil that night. He took my father with him on a slow, screaming ride to hell. The funeral was like any other. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. A man was buried in the holy ground, and nobody but me and my mother ever knew that it was no man, but a monster. I remember how she looked when they lowered him into the cold, hard earth. She had this little smile on her face, no tears, no anguish, just a little smile. She was free.